Hey, handsome. So
Hey,
we were
babe.
just in Trader Joe's and we ran into Jews. What's the difference between a Hasidic Jew and like an Israeli Jew or like a Lubavitch Jew?
Um, okay. There are the original people they refer to as the Hebrews, which really is just a canonized version of a sect that was allegedly connected to the patriarch they refer to as Abraham, who the Muslims or the Muslims refer to as Ibrahim. And he was a wealthy person. This is how the story goes for people who believe that this stuff is actually real people, whatever. So I'm just give you the story. So the story was Abraham was already married to a woman, and then he went into another land and then married another woman, and then told his first wife that the second wife was really his maid when really he was having babies with her. So that's the first nigga in history to basically flip like a baby mom's to a side chick situation.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, oh, so
Right.
he had a side.
So he had like a side shorty, and he was acting like she was just the maid when really he was smashing, and he had another baby with her. So that's the difference between Sarah and Hagar. So the sons of Sarah are called Saracens or
Nice
Saracens,
chest.
right? Thank you. Saracens are this representative of the sons of Sarah, who was Abraham's first wife. So we Moors, we will fall under that designation, right? The Hagarenes or the Hagarenes, right? They are the ones who came from Hagar. So that was the side chick, second shorty, who wasn't necessarily of the same bloodline. So that's where the split comes. So these people today that they call Jews, who are phenotypically WIGHT white, i.e. what we would perceive as European, which is really not a good word for them. But anyway, those guys come out of another group called, thank you, those guys come out of another group called the Ashkenazim. These Ashkenazims, right? When you get a book called The 13th Tribe by Arthur Koestler, that book basically busts into the fact that they can't necessarily be seen as the original so-called Hebrews or what you want to refer to as Jews, which is really a misnomer. It's actually used, right? They can't really be that because they were all converted in the 8th century by Moors, people that look like us. Because at the time, they were under a jurisdiction of their king, who was a guy called the Kagan. This Kagan, right, he existed in the straits of what they call the Straits of the Dardanelles, which is what we today call the the wild caves of West Asia. This is in what they call Caucasia, which is now today called Georgia, Russia. Anyway, there's 6 main hills up in that place. And this is where the Kagan and his people were basically locked away, because maybe 10,000 years before that, they had been locked up there by those Moors who had traveled across the hot Arabian desert into the caves of West Asia to exile those who would become known as the whites or the Ashkenazim or the Jews. Anyway, while they were there, they maintained a certain homogeny amongst themselves and created a pseudo-culture. That pseudo-culture was somewhat savage in the sense that they were not recognized as having a civilized culture. So they would do things like defecate on themselves to stay warm. They would dig holes in the ground and sleep in the holes. This is the type of stuff they was doing. So it wasn't until the Kagan realized that he needed to get his people a state religion so they could be regarded and come into the greater so-called human family, who were using religious societies as a means of establishing a civilized or civilization base. So the Kagan requested three representatives, one from Islam, one from what's called Christianity, the other from what we would today call Hebrewism or Judaism. But all three of these representatives are all melanated people. Okay? So these savage Ashkenazims basically got all three of them to come there to see which one they was going to choose. So he chose, so the Christian found out that the Muslim was on his way there, and then the Christian wound up having the Muslim killed, so the Muslim wouldn't be able to get there. So in the end, it just wound up that it was just going to be, so the Kagan, once the Christian and the Hebrew showed up before him, in his limited understanding, he said, well, I need to put a state religion for my people. So which one of y'all is the real one? So the Christians started to go and pontificate about Jesus Christ and all this other stuff, because he was from Byzantine, and at the time the Byzantines were melanated pseudo-Ethiopians, right, who were occupying what they now today they call Istanbul, but at the time it was called Constantinople. So the Hebrew let the Christians say all of that, and then he said, well, look, he could say whatever he wants, but if you ask him where his religion came from, he'll tell you that it came from mine. So obviously I'm here first and he's second. So the Kagan looked at him, he said, yo, that's true? He was like, yeah. So he was like, okay, well, I need to speak to the Muslim. He said, yeah, but the Muslim's dead. You know what I mean? The Christian killed the Muslim before he could even come here and give you the option of Islam. So the Kagan was like, all right, well, if that's the case, then we all going to be Hebrews. So then the Muslim said, well, you can't be a Hebrew because you're not from the original blood. But we can give you an aspect of Hebrewism that we'll call Judaism for you. And so they adopted Judaism as their situation to get them brought back into the human family, okay? And so they adopted this, and then what that did was that put them in league or under the Hebrew Moors, who at the time were running everything out of Cordoba and España, Spain over there, as well as parts of, well, mostly all of Spain. So that kind of put them under that. So that means then that they were able to then use their position and pay the Ashkenazim converts now to basically attack other people on their behalf. And so the Kagan got a lot of money from that over the years. So eventually, after the fall of Granada and these things happened, a lot of those Moors who were, i.e. what we'll call Hebrews, that I'll call Canaanitic, they then were able to use a lot of these Ashkenazims, right, who 800 years before had converted to this version of that version of Judaism, to give them the right now to set up what's called little pogroms. These pogroms in Europe is another way of saying ghetto. And these little pogroms where these Ashkenazims was at, they were now functioning under their own version of Judaism, which is why they started to speak, they couldn't speak the original Hebrew because that's not their original language. So what they had to do was they had to learn how to speak Hebrew.
Yiddish.
This is where Yiddish came from. So because their natural tongue was that, they basically adopted the Yiddish thing into that. Now, Yiddish is totally different than Hebrew. That's why Jews have to go to Hebrew school to learn how to be Hebrew, because they're really not Hebrews. They are converted into that. So once they converted into that, they created their own little societies in which they started to protect and started to build up equity in their communities by creating a system called usury. That usury became the reason why a lot of them started to become outcast by the general society at play, because they were charging exorbitant amounts of interest on anybody that wasn't technically considered a Jew. But again, you can't really be a Jew because the Jews were converted, you remember, by the true Hebrews, who themselves really were Muslim Canaanites. So a lot got lost in the translation, of course, and then eventually they associated themselves with this culture, and then that culture became the basis for them to do that. So then all up in Europe, like in the Urals of Russia, parts of the Balkans, Eastern Europe, all the way now into Germany, they started to come out and they started to make little money for themselves by practicing usury amongst their own people. And then when other people would try to come to them who were not Jews, they would charge them an exorbitant amount of usury. And in that, they was able to collect that money and build up their coffers, right? And in that, they started to create different aspects of the usury. So they started to up the interest on whatever you would work with them with to like 5%, 10%, 20%, 30%, 40, 50. Then it got to the point where they basically is owning a lot of money, a lot of property and stuff, which they were forbidden to do because they weren't from the original line of Abraham.
But you can't hate on that hustle.
But you can't hate on that hustle because they made a culture for themselves out of that. They figured it out because they knew we Moors, keep them out of it. We was never going to free them. We was never going to give them no land.
They just said, let me just create a little side hustle.
Yes.
I got it.
To protect themselves. To protect themselves. And so they built that up, and then eventually by the late 1800s to 1900s, they now were able to create a society, basically, that was basically going to all run in that. So it got to the point where people like Mohammed Hossein, a.k.a. the real Hitler, Adolf Hitler, the real one, the black one, and his society saw what they was doing and decided to shut all that down. So he shut all of it down, right? And then what they did was they created their own version of the Nazi party. Because remember, the Ashkenazi. So Nazi is a part of Ashkenaz, right? So the Nazi section created their own version of that, so that way they could then take over the same pogroms that they were relegated to, and then created a sub-society within their society in which now they could rule over all of the poorer Jews under them. And then they started to practice the usury, started to blackmail and use that to get other monies. And then eventually they established their own little society. So by the time Hitler came, he wasn't having it and decided to get rid of all of them, right? So when that happened, that worked for the Jews who were now posing as the real European nobility, i.e. the fake Windsors, who were really the fake Coburg, Saxe, Gotha, who had left Europe, had left Germany, had taken on a fake European name, British name, to appear more British, and then because they were somewhat Ashkenazim, started to now take the place as the decoy royalty that was ruling now that the original nobility, the real Britons now, they had now been exiled. So now they're coming in as the new fake royal family. They're coming in acting like they're British when they're really German. And now they're now setting up the systematic situation because they've been all backed by Rothschild, the Red Shields, Amschel and them. But Amschel, Rothschild, and these people, these were all light-skinned black people up until the early 1900s. Then they bleached themselves out and started marrying Ashkenazims, right, to be now more white. So now they can now do the work for the Vatican, who are also Jews, the Roman Catholic Jews, who they call in the Roman Catholics, the Pope and them. They're really Jews because you see the Pope wear the kippah, and then hooked up and created what's called the Balfour Agreement. The Balfour Resolution, that was done by Evelyn Rothschild, one of the evilest people in the world, and created the Balfour Resolution that basically said that the Rothschilds bought the fake Jerusalem over there in Africa. And now this is the place where they're going to set up a homestead situation for all of the Russian, Yiddish, Ashkenazim Jews who were all converted over 800 years ago, to give them now a fake place in the world to say that this is their nation. But the people who are already there, the real Falashim Jews, the real Egyptians and these people, they all had to get up out of there. So by 1967, they put this in 1945, and then between 1945 and 1967, they created what they call the kibbutz system, or the kibbutz system, where they would import Russian Jews from the straight to the Dardanelles into Egypt, and have them basically squat like squatters, and had them squat there on a real Egyptians' land and all of that, and then eventually by 1967 wage war against them to get rid of all of them, and then create the quagmire that we're all in today.
History. So interesting.
And so in Brooklyn, you have the Lubavitch and you have the Setmars. The Lubavitch is in Crown Heights, the Setmars is in Williamsburg. They are like the Crips and the Bloods with each other. They bang on each other because the Lubavitch is for Israel, which is a terrorist state, and the Setmars are against the shit.
There we go. To be continued. Thank you so much, everyone. Time to pick up on more from gymnastics.
Know yourself, man.
Wanted to
more bites.
Empower and just ask that question coming from traders.
Word.
Have a great evening, everyone. Continue to support
Peace.
The Real.
Get the book 13th Tribe by Arthur Koestler. And get the book Othello's Children in the New World by Jose Pimenta Bay.
Peace.
Peace.